So the teacher-student place is this place in which we're in this field of Eros value together. We're all equal in the field. We all have a unique expression of the field, right? Right? And a teacher should be in radical devotion to the student, and right, the teacher and student should be in radical devotion to each other, and they should be in devotion together to the field of she, to the field of value. And there's transmission. Transmission is real, and there's penetration, and then there's mutual penetration, and we love each other open, right? And it's this very, 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 very deep and subtle, right? Deep and subtle play. We are at this moment in this time between worlds and time between stories, in which either we're going to reconfigure reality. We're going to actually participate in what I have called for the last 15 years, evolving the source code of consciousness and culture. And I remember when I first shared that with, actually it was with Tammy Simon, maybe 15 years ago. A name that hasn't come across my consciousness in a long time, right? Who runs a company called Sounds True. And it's about 15 years ago, maybe less, maybe 12 years ago, 10 years ago, right? And I was talking about this idea of evolving the source code. And there was a very very sharp pushback, right? Against this notion of evolving the source code, which was really a pushback against the notion that there is a source code. Right? Because a source code means there's something immutable, right? There's something that's eternal. There's something that's unchanging. And then we can evolve that unchanging thing. We can change and deepen that which is unchanging, and it will remain eternal and yet evolve. And what we're saying here in One Mountain, Many Paths, we're saying this is a moment of revolution or die. Not because that's a dramatic thing to say, because actually, if you look carefully at a very good meta-analysis, which together with our partners we're doing, if you look at a very deep meta-analysis of the state of the world today, we are actually facing what we've called the second shock of existence. And the second shock of existence is the potential not for the death of a human being, right? The fact that death is part of human existence. Death is a door between two days, but it's part of human existence. That was the first shock of existence at the dawn of human history. And then we go through all the stages of human history and we get to the second shock of existence, which is the experience, the realization, not of the death of an individual human being. It's not personal mortality. It's collective mortality. It's the potential death of humanity itself. We might call that existential risk or the meta crisis. I called it, many years ago in conversation with Malc, right? There's a book called, right, The Shock of Existence, right? Malc, my friend in Holland, I talked about the second shock and how unique self teachings are a response to the second shock. So we've been using the word second shock of existence. I wrote with Zach Stein an article on responding to the second shock of existence. This is 2011. The second shock of existence is, right, the experience of not the death of the human being, but the death of humanity. And there's two kinds of second shock. And one is the potential existential risk, the actual death of humanity. And that is a viable and real possibility that humanity as we know it will, over the next X amount of decades or hundreds of years, actually she's suggesting there'll be another extinction. There's already been 6 extinctions, right, for various reasons. So there'll be another extinction-like event, but this one generated by the exponential power of exponential technology, unmoored from wisdom, unmoored from a field of value, right? Unmoored from interior sciences, this radical split between interiors and exteriors at the very heart and fabric of existence, right? And so what we've said in One Mountain is, right now, how many of you have heard me say this before? Pretty much everyone, right? And we actually have to recontextualize and locate ourselves every week, because it's very easy to look away. Does everyone get that? Very easy to look away. So I say it again in some form or another every week to actually locate myself, to locate us, right? To orient the compass of the revolution. What are we doing? We're not doing, this is not a Jesus church, right? This is not a little mystery church, which is doing its nice, right? And let's have a nice and beautiful spiritual experience. And right, that's not what this is. And there's places for that. That's not what this is. Right? There's a place for Jesus. There's a place for the Christ. There's a place for, Atman is Brahman, and there's a place for Mat, and a place for Geist, and a place for Adonai Hu Elohim. There's a place for the modern versions of the old religions. That's not what we're doing. Those all have a place. But we're attuning to the essential allurement of Cosmos today. And the allurement of Cosmos is this desperate need for a new story of value that responds to the second shock of existence, that allows us to navigate that second shock, and that actually articulates a story of value that can walk us through this 11th hour of human existence, that can walk us through this time between worlds, a new story of value that actually emerges in this time between stories, which actually changes the game. And we always refer back, anyone refer to, say the next sentence for me, we refer back to the Renaissance. And we always refer back to the Renaissance because the Renaissance was also a time between worlds and a time between stories, between the pre-modern political, economic, social, religious world and what was going to emerge as the modern world. And the Renaissance is this time between worlds in which essentially what Ficino, Da Vinci, and the whole gang do in Florence, while most of Florence, there's 9 other families in Florence, are concerned with Florentine politics, right? Firenze politics, right? They're actually able to see around the corner, and they begin to tell a new story of value. And that new story of value births modernity. And give me the next sentence, anybody, give me the next sentence. And to the extent that they got the plot lines right, they birthed what Habermas called the dignities of modernity. And to the extent that the plot lines were lost, the disasters of modernity actually became the causative forces of existential risk. And my dear friend and evolutionary homemate, beloved Barbara Marx Hubbard, spent her life teaching about the win-lose metrics as this core generator function. She didn't call it a generator function. My dear friend Daniel uses the term generator function, but it was Barbara. Daniel and I kind of were deeply impacted by both of us by Barbara. Barbara got this win-lose dimension. It wasn't her original teaching, it was the insight that she ran with, that this win-lose metrics is at the core of everything. And let's now add to it that win-lose metric stands against social synergy. And social synergy means, right, that actually we can actually identify what's already working worldwide and bring it together. That was Barbara's understanding. Barbara's understanding was that we need to generate social synergy, because without that, we're going to collapse. We're going to have what Snowden called complicated systems that are fragile, that break down. And then I'm just trying to locate us. And then Barbara and I met, and Barbara had already articulated this notion of win-lose and this notion of social synergy, which would stand against complicated systems, right? And she got that deeply. And Daniel, Barbara, and I sat down and did a kind of deep talk on the future human. It was, early notions, but Barbara had laid that ground down, but it didn't work. It was true, but partial. And then Barbara and I started studying, right? She did what was called Holy of Holies with me, which is this deep process of interior study where we go into the source code again. And I tried to share with Barbara, who was more delighted, more open, more alive, more curious, more filled with audacity and humility than any 83-year-old that I've ever seen, 83, 84. And we spent 5 years in deep study where I began to talk about intimacy and value, right? And Eros, right? The field of value. Social synergy is not enough, right? Barbara grew up when I say grew up, her 60s and 70s were in this world of techno-optimism. My friend Ken Wilber was originally He later shifted his course very dramatically and beautifully, but originally all of us, everybody, we were all techno-optimists, right? The potential, the social potential of the internet, right? And in the end, it actually doesn't hold. In the end, it breaks down. In the end, the internet, the techno-optimist internet actually is generating a Skinner's box, which seeks to control us with invisible technologies of control and is actually tightening its vise around the way we think, breathe, and feel, right? And if you think that's not true and you're 62 years old or 60 years old, take a look at a 10-year-old, right? Take a look at TikTok, right? Take a look not at the world that you grew up in, but the world that the next generation is growing up in. And so Barbara and I spend 5 years, right, deep in Holy of Holies talking about Eros as value, about unique self, irreducible uniqueness as value, or about what I called first principles and first values, or what we termed, right, I called it CosmoErotic Humanism. And CosmoErotic Humanism became this new story of value, which integrated all of the dharmic thinking, right, that we, that we engaged in together, all the Dharma thing that I'd done for the last 20, 25 years. Every time I encountered a Dharma problem, I tried to solve the problem. So true self-thinking was inaccurate and limited. So I tried to solve it and understand the depth of true self, but then originate a new understanding called unique self and evolutionary unique self and unique self symphony, which included and transcended and gave us a new story of identity, right? And the universe stories we had were limited. The kind of mythopoetic reaches of people like, Mary Evelyn Tecker and Brian Swim, who are both students of, what's his name that escapes me right now, that beautiful, beautiful man who wrote the universe story with Brian Swim. What's his name? God, his name escapes me. He was a Thomas Berry. Thank you. Right. Thomas Berry. Thank you. Right. In other words, and Thomas is great. And Thomas had enormous influence on Brian, who's a mathematical cosmologist and is doing great work, and Mary Evelyn Tucker, and they did this universe story conversation, but it was actually mythopoetic. It didn't believe that value was real. It stayed with the standard neo-Darwinian narrative that's science is long outstripped. It didn't talk about a field of Eros. It didn't talk about first principles and first values. It wanted to stay within the postmodern context and mythopoetically talk about a better world. So I realized that, and I stepped in. I said, let's articulate a new universe story. So we stepped deep into creating a new universe story, and let's actually make distinctions. It's not a Kigo Satami story, although I cite that often, right? Which is about cultivating compassion. Exactly. No, it's actually outrageous love, right? And although I cited Tagore and Dante, we're actually talking about something new. It's actually a new emergent. It's this very unique emergent called outrageous love. That outrageous love, Eros, is the very core of reality, right? And that actually it's throbbing, and it includes sexuality and includes desire, right? And it's something beyond what Dante, right, was talking about, although he was referring to a glimmering of it. And it's definitely beyond what the Buddha stories were talking about, although we include something of the Buddha stories, right? And I cite the mustard seed story, right, when we can, right? But that's not what it is. It's something new. Right. That's what I'm trying to communicate. Right. And it's not about locating it in the old thing. Yes, we want to locate it and we want to receive all of the pre-modern versions and all the modern versions and actually show that we're drawing on this very large lineage on the one hand. On the other hand, we're creating something which needs to be created that's actually startlingly new. It's startlingly new. It's an evolutionary emergent. Ken and I had a long talk. Ken Wilber and I had a long talk about the unique self, and I was looking for earlier sources for the unique self in the great traditions, whether it was, back in 2003, the 10th Oxfording picture in Buddhism, or Sahaj Samadhi, right, in Kashmir Shaivism, right? And that's all true, and it's evolving, and it's a radically new evolutionary emergent. So what we're doing, and this brings us to the question of teacher-student. Right, which Haley and David spoke so beautifully about last week, and I want to talk about it for a couple of minutes. But I want to set the context. Who are we? Where are we? What are we doing? Right, everything is the context. Everything is setting my intention, focusing my attention. What are we doing here? We're actually aware that we're in a time between stories and time between worlds. One, Two, we want to actually do something about it. We've actually identified and said that in order to actually shift and change and reconfigure and evolve our world so that we don't actually collapse a meta crisis, which means trillions of unborn babies, which means billions of lives lost in the present, trillions of unborn babies in the future, right? And all the projects of the past unfinished, right? If we don't want to actually experience the collapse of the most disadvantaged among us, because the first 2 billion people to die and suffer are going to be in heat waves in India, right? Which are very possible, in which literally 2 million people could die in 2 weeks. So it's the disadvantage. It's not those of us living in comfortable homes, right? In upper middle class or upper class environments or very stable middle classes living in, right, where most of us live around the world. Most of the people on this call from around the world live in those structures. No, it's the most disadvantaged of us that will be first hit by the second shock of existence. If we want to actually avoid that suffering, that's what we're here. We're trying to actually avoid suffering and actually bring as many human beings and then beyond human beings into the circle of Eros, the circle of love. We actually have to evolve the source code. We have to change not just the infrastructure of reality, but all the infrastructure moves. The technology infrastructure moves, not just the social structure, the governance structures. We have to actually change the basic story in which we live. We call that the superstructure, but there's many names for it. All right, we've got to change culture itself. We have to evolve the source code of culture. We can't just claim new paradigms. Oh, we have a new paradigm and declare them. We have to work so crazy hard and go into the source code itself, right? And actually work with religion and integrate the best of religions into a new grammar and integrate the best of systems theory and chaos theory and complexity theory. And Elaine has to bring us linguistics and merge it with intimacy. And we need, right, all of education and we need all of the insights from all of the fields, right, from across mathematics and across chemistry and across molecular biology, right, and across the fields in sociology and across the 11 or 12 fields of psychology. We need to actually integrate it in a story that you can tell to a group of 60 truckers any place in the world, that I can tell to an 8-year-old that can actually pass muster at the most sophisticated and evolved Jesuit academy, right, that includes and transcends the best, but then it's an emergent. And we can't hide. We have to be courageous. We have to claim the emergent. We can't just, right? We can't just hide it and try and, I know we're claiming it. We're about to do a dialogue with Andrew, sponsored by the Unique Self Institute. The Unique Self Institute is a major emergent, a unique self, right? Hosted in the Unique Self Institute, which is a division of the center, is a major emergent. It's the best tool we have to actually understand who we are, that merges all the theories of identity of Eastern and Western Enlightenment, right, in a new synergy. That's what we mean by a new synergy. So when Barbara and I were doing for those 5 years in Holy of Holies, what we said was, it's not enough to say there's a win-lose metrics, and it's not enough to say that we need social synergy to respond to it, although those are both enormously important. That's a great start. That was Barbara's start. And Daniel's articulated and picked up pieces of that when he talks about the generator functions of existential risk. But it's deeper than that. And Daniel and I had many talks about this back in 2014, and Barbara and I talked about this incessantly between 2014 and when Barbara passed in 2018, which is actually, there's a deeper root cause to these generator functions of existential risk. And what's the deeper root cause? The deeper root cause is there's a global intimacy disorder. So I want to get that. I know it gets jarbled for people, and I can feel the jarble, and I want to clarify. Does everyone get why this is worth, right, clarifying? We have to clarify this, okay? So you've got these two generator functions, right? One, win-lose metrics, right? Rivalrous conflict governed by win-lose metrics. And two, that generates complicated systems, and things break down. And we need to move towards what Barbara called social synergy. But you can't move towards social synergy unless you have intimacy, which is why we said the underlying root cause underneath these generator functions is a global intimacy disorder. Why? So to spell it out, though, and again, I can feel different people hearing it. Even people who have known me for 10 years, they hear it, and they just, okay, I know those words, and then they stop thinking. And then there gets to be a tired repetition around the way we even repeat it to ourselves. No, it's got to be completely fresh, completely new. We, right, as the revolution, we have to kind of re-understand it, re-engage it every day. It's why feminism did consciousness raising groups, and it's why, right, deep changes in society, right, we're being talked about in the cafes, right, of Paris. And by Paris, I mean Paris, mythopoetically all over the world. If you're not talking about it at a cafe, if you're not thinking about it when you go to sleep, it's not causing a conflict between you and your beloved, then it's not real. We got to actually feel this, actually find it. So what do we mean when we say there's a global intimacy disorder underneath? Well, one, if you're in win-lose metrics, you can't have intimacy because I've reduced you to an it. You serve me, you're instrumental to me. You may even be my partner, but you're still instrumental. We're not really intimate with each other. Now, to know what that means, we need to know what intimacy means. So we need to understand that intimacy is shared identity. Intimacy is mutuality of, we place attention on each other. Mutuality of recognition and attention. Mutuality of value. Mutuality of telos, purpose. Mutuality of feeling, pathos. Right? So that's, right? So we need to be intimate together. Right? Win-lose metrics is not intimate, meaning we have no shared identity. Intimacy is shared identity in the context of these mutualities of recognition and mutualities of feeling and mutualities of purpose and mutualities of value. But if we're in win-lose metrics, there can't be shared identity. One. Two, the win-lose metrics creates the opposite of synergy. Synergy is separate parts create larger wholes. That's new intimacies. Synergy is just another word for intimacy, right? But you don't get that when you can use social synergy your whole life and not get it's talking about intimacy. When Barbara and I first started talking, and I started talking about intimacy, Barbara's like, why are we talking about intimacy? And we did this very deep, beautiful dive together, and we impacted each other greatly and had a gorgeous, gorgeous ride. But one of the things that became clear was no, synergy is just another word for intimacy. Synergy means separate parts come together into a new whole, which has a shared identity in the context of otherness. That's what synergy means, right? So complicated systems, right, in which the parts don't know each other, and therefore it's fragile, right? So the supply lines are not connected to their end customers. For example, right, each country and each company and each vector in the international market is vying for its own success 2.0, but there's no sense of the larger whole and the telos of the larger whole. We don't realize the larger whole has a direction. I participate in that larger whole. I don't try and align myself with the plot line of the larger whole. I pull only for my limited success. I'm a short-termer. I can't see future generations. I'm stuck in the myopic tyranny of the superficial present. The myopic tyranny of the superficial present, right, creates fragile systems that optimize, right, for what? Right, for efficiency, not for resilience, for profit, for windfall profits, not for actually thriving, right? And then you leave out billions of people out of the safety net, and then you create polarization, which becomes one of the major vectors of existential risk. Does everyone get that? So we said there's a root cause, there's a global intimacy disorder. In order to make that real, we need to understand what's intimacy. So we identified intimacy. But then we need to understand that intimacy and eros and uniqueness, these are values of cosmos. These are first principles and first values. These are the mathematics of intimacy of cosmos. And so that actually, unless we have a shared story of value, we can't be intimate with each other. Does that make sense, everyone? Unless we have a shared story of value, we simply cannot be intimate with each other, right? Can't be done. When we find that rare moment in life, we find some new close person to us, we realize, wow, we have a shared field of value. It's not shared values. We're in the field of value together. If we're not in the field of value together, we can't be intimate. So we realized that the global intimacy disorder is rooted in a breakdown of the field of value, in the sense that we've stepped out of the field of value. Then we identified the field of value with the Tao, right? Each one of these, sometimes I read something that goes out, or, I hear it. It's like people are just repeating. Each one of these is this huge, deep, engraved, right? Hard-won insight. These are hard-won insights, right? And they take all, right, until we get it. Then we have to get it again and again. It doesn't become jargon. It's deep. Does everyone get it? It's deep. So in that context, we can talk about, right? And in that context, we can talk about, now we can talk about, okay, now let's talk about the teacher-student relationship. That's our context for it. And it's, for me, this reorients me. I can actually find myself, right? I can't, otherwise you loop, we get lost. And it starts to become plabum, right? It starts to become automatic, right? So we got to locate ourselves deep in the field. We have to relocate ourselves deep in the field. So now let's take the next leap. Here we go. Okay, here we go. Friends, here we go. So now it's exciting. So now within that context, what's the teacher-student? Okay, and that's what David and Christina talked about so beautifully. And David and Christina and I had a beautiful talk in when we were doing our biannual seminar, which we just started at my dear friend Surya Forel's Monastic Academy. And Surya's joined our board, and we've joined, Zach's joined his board, and we're working together in a very, very deep way. Okay, it's deep, it's beautiful. I even in this recapitulation we did, I wasn't teaching this, right? I was just evoking it, right? Does that get that? Right? I was just trying to evoke it, right? In other words, I was assuming that we've talked about this for a decade, but we actually have to evoke it again and put the pieces together. So I wasn't presenting it in a way that I would to someone who'd never heard this, but I was trying to evoke its depth. But to evoke its depth is different. And this is where, and I want to say this tenderly, but even some of the people closest to me, they start repeating, right? You can't repeat. Don't repeat, right? Go and learn it and know it again. That's what we have to do in love. We have to fall in love again. We fall in love again every day. We have to fall in love with each other. We have to fall in love with the Dharma. We have to fall in love with first principles and first values. We have to fall in love with the distinctions anew, again, originally, every day, right? And life goes insipid. Life goes flaccid. Life becomes non-erotic and non-intimate, right? Life becomes desiccated, dry, inert when we repeat. It doesn't matter whether I'm repeating I love you, right? Or I think I've heard that before, right? And so, like, for me, so I'm going to tell you one of the gifts that a student gives a teacher, and I want to talk just a few minutes now about the teacher-student relationship, and we're going to do hero next week, obviously, right? But for me, let me give you just something from a teacher perspective. What is a great student, right? So a great student is where they listen in a way that they're not thinking, right? There's a certain kind of student that I got that, I know that you've said that. Then they never grow. And then I literally inside in my interior, I get limp. I lose my access, right, to the center. But if the student's heart, it doesn't matter whether the student's 90 years old, right, or 8, that's not the point. It doesn't matter. It's about someone who's receiving, but in the nature of the receiving, you get loved open. Right? Does everyone get that? And it's the exchange of teacher-students always making love. It has nothing to do with sexuality, but it's always lovemaking. And that's how it's described by the lineage. It's always zivug. Right? And so what the student has the capacity to do is to receive so deeply, right? And in making love, the receiver is fully active, right? So the student receives so deeply that the teacher gets loved open, right? And that allows the teacher to enter so deeply that the student gets loved open. Right? Does everyone get that? Now, if you notice, and that's what I meant when I've shared with David, with Christina, with all of us, that's what I meant when I said the teacher becomes the student becomes the teacher, meaning in the classical model, the teacher is dukhra, the teacher is penetrating, and the student is nukva, the student is receiving. Okay? That's the classical model. That's a lot by itself. That actually understands teaching not as the sharing of information, but as this great act, right, of cosmic eros performed in the space of mind-heart. It's cosmic eros performed in the space of mind-heart and the transmission. So the teacher tries to stand in the field of value. The teacher tries to embody the field of value. The teacher, if they're real, should have genuine attainment in the field of value, even as they're imperfect and flawed and subject to making mistakes and can receive feedback, right? That's all true, and the teacher should have some genuine level of attainment. You should feel them standing in the forever field, in the field of value. You want to know that the teacher is willing to die for truth, to die for goodness, right? To die for value, right? You want the teacher not to be making up their own, kind of like, oh, this is my own, let me give you my own, kind of take on reality. You want the teacher to be actually receiving in the field of Eros, in the field of she, in the field of the intimate universe, and then trying to discern distinction in that field, and then to penetrate the student with those distinctions. So the teacher's fully active and the student's fully receiving. But then it switches. How does it switch? It switches because in the nature of the student's receiving, they actually penetrate the teacher. Like there's this dramatic penetration. And then that loves the teacher open. Then the teacher opens into the wider field in an entirely different way, right? In an entirely different way, right? So now again, let's feel this. This is all taking place in the field of value, right? Now, by the field of value, and that's we wrote this entire book here. Where is it? It's someplace here. Called, where is that book? Here it is, right? This is for Nancy, a book called First Principles and First Values. We're going to have to get that for you. Okay, so someone put the link to that in the chat box for Nancy, right, to amplify. So that's a big conversation. But Nancy, thank you for the question. Let me just say in one sentence now, by field of value, we mean the field of intrinsic, it's not something socially constructed. Nancy, if you're familiar with Eastern thought, one of the words they use, which I translate as the field of value, right? It's a particular trend, is the Tao. But another word would be kind of the field of intrinsic, inherent telos. Telos means it's got direction, it's going somewhere, there's a plot line. So that reality actually has intrinsic, inherent plot lines. It's going somewhere. Reality has inherent, just like mathematical values or values of the exterior world, the interior world has intrinsic, inherent values. For example, Eros. Now, again, Nancy, you'll say, what does Eros mean? So that's also, right? There's a book called A Return to Eros, and we should keep these books in the chat box so people can find them. A Return to Eros, which is, what is Eros? But just in a word, right? Eros, which applies across all the sciences and all the social sciences, the level of matter, level of life, the level of mind. Eros is the experience of radical aliveness, desiring ever deeper contact and ever greater wholeness. That's, Nancy, what we call the Eros equation. So there's very formal interior science equations. So there's a little bit of a catch up there, so which is totally perfect. So if someone can make sure that we help Nancy and anyone, right? What I would suggest is just in terms of core reading, and we actually should do that every week. We were doing it. I think we stopped doing it for a reason that I don't know, but there's a Unique Self book, book 1, Unique Self. Book 2 is A Return to Eros. Those 2 books are core. And then book 3 would be First Principles and First Values, which is actually, I would read that afterwards. Okay. So that's yes, just for a couple of first-time people. I hope that's helpful. So now back to where we're going. Okay, that was a little bracket. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Okay, I want to go back to where we were. Okay, so now teacher-student. So I'm going to talk about this teacher-student in the next 10 minutes. Is really is everything. So I want to try and kind of get this deeply. So first off, both the teacher and student are in the field of value. And let's pick up the thread, the teacher-student in the context of this broader field. So 1, the teacher and student are both in the field of value. 1. 2, the teacher wants to transmit to the student a set of discernments in the field of value. Now, this is not what happens in most teacher-student relationships, right? That's one of the problems. Either the kind of teacher-student relationships are exactly not this. Either we have teacher-student relationships, let's say in the university, where the assumption is there's no field of value, number 1, And the teacher is at best transmitting bits of information. Now, that's legitimate. Those relationships should happen. That is a form of a teacher-student relationship. And that's good. That's fantastic. That should exist. That's not what we're talking about. That's a different, it uses the term teacher-student, but it's talking about something entirely different. It's like, there is no field of value. That's the assumption of the Western liberal academy, all the entire university system world over, both in closed societies and in open societies, assume there's no field of value. Wrong. For lots of reasons. We've talked about, right, how we need to revision the field of value in this book, First Principles and First Values, right? They're basing themselves on misunderstandings of value, and we've tried to actually crack value theory in the last 10 years. And I think we've done that, in a good way. So that's one. But the assumption is that we're not in the field of value, one, and two, the teacher's job is to transmit a body of unique information that they have to the student. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. That's one form. And in that sense, there's actually no hierarchy at all between teacher and student, right? The teacher happens to have a piece of information. They give it to the student. That's it. That's one possibility. Second possibility, which is the more classical possibility in the East, is that the teacher has this deep attainment of enlightenment, but enlightenment is usually not actually identified properly with value. Enlightenment is this deep sense of, right, the field of oneness, which tells the person that their true identity is, I'm not just separate, I'm part of the field of oneness, which is true and good and beautiful. That's great. And the teacher has more of that realization. The teacher's in some sense more enlightened, they're claiming, when they may well be. They have more attainment of enlightenment. And so they try and share that experience of enlightenment with the student. And because the teacher has more enlightenment, or more what we call in the formal language, more true self, which is kind of true self is my true self is that I'm part of the one. I'm part of the singular that has no plural. That's how we're using the word true self. Okay? It's a formal word that we use in what we call the four selves that we talk about in the Unique Self book. Right? So the teacher has more true self. So they say, because I have more true self, I also have authority over you. And the teacher begins to assume authority over the student. And authority per se is not bad. But then the teacher assumes authority over dimensions the teacher should have no authority. And it collapses. And that doesn't work because the student's not just oneness or consciousness. The student is unique, a unique expression of consciousness. And the teacher can't have more uniqueness than the student has. So if I actually realize that I'm not just true self, but I'm actually unique self. And unique self is not just the talent of my separate self level one, skin encapsulated ego, separate. Level two, I'm not just separate, I'm part of the one, true self. Level three, unique self, I'm a unique expression of the field. And the field is seamless, but it's not featureless, which is not a quote from Whitehead, right? As someone said to me the other day. No, it's actually, it's a very unique way that we say things in CosmoErotic Humanism. And I actually originally read a version of this in a several volume epic by a guy named Blthye. I've got to figure out how to pronounce it on Zen Classics. It was where kind of that phrase, seamless but not featureless, came from. But actually, we're doing something new and original with it, right, David? It's not about going back to quote. It's about we're doing something new and original. We're saying that's unique self. Unique self is seamless but not featureless. We're using it in a particular way. Okay, right? He was talking when he talked about it in his Zen Classics book. He was using it in a very different way, but not unrelated, which is why I brought it to bear. But we're using it in a kind of new emergent way, right? The unique self is seamless but not featureless. I'm a unique expression of this field, but this field is not just this field of consciousness. Back, Nancy, to your question, it's a field of value, a field of Eros value. It's a field of Eros desire, intimacy, value. And I'm a unique expression of that field of Eros desire, intimacy, value. So if that quality exists in a human being, that's unique in the person, so the teacher can have no authority over that. And the teacher is still transmitting to the student. There still is a natural, appropriate, holistic hierarchy of attainment in which the teacher is actually sharing. So there's both this full egalitarianism in terms of power. There's a full egalitarianism in terms of, everyone has their own individuated autonomy. And yet, there's this transmission, and there's this sense in which the teacher is what's called the dukhra, which is this kind of active penetrating force. And the student is the nukba, is this kind of receptive force. But then, as we said now, like 10 minutes ago, now I'm picking up that thread from 10 minutes ago. This, right? Actually, the student that fully receives, meaning I fully open myself, right? So for example, I'll just give you an example, okay? I'll just give you just an example, right? So, right, my teacher who passed away, and I've had nothing to do with for 40 years, right? Because I left the classical system that he taught of orthodoxy. But my teacher, right? I used to, I used to like literally listen to every word he said. And then I would review every word he said. Then I would review it again and again and again. And then every time he talked about the same thing, I'd be more ecstatic than I was the time before, right? Because I could learn from the way he said it again, some new nuance. And basically, right, I was in for, and even after I left the system that he taught, I tracked everything he did and everything he said, right? Because I knew that he was in the field of value, right? And listened to him again and again and again and again and wanted to hear everything, right? And I didn't say, okay, I got this. I got what he said. No, I opened myself up again and again and again, right? And during the time when I knew him, right, he would always be excited to share something with me because in the way that I listened to him, I was receiving it so deeply, right, that he would in some sense know it better because he realized that in some sense I was penetrating him with my receiving. Does everyone get that? Who got that? Who got that? Does everyone get that? As I listen in a kind of way where I'm not listening, right, in a way where there's this kind of subtle egoic structure at play, right? And you can literally feel that, right? Sometimes I'll talk to someone who I love madly, but literally their egoic structure is so at play, even though they don't realize it, they just stop listening. And then literally I go dry. I can't feel it. I can't feel the eros. I can't feel the field, right? And so there's actually this exchange. That's what Taheli was talking about in her Dharma recap, Christina Amelon. There's this exchange where the teacher becomes the student becomes the teacher. Okay, so that's one. Okay, right? That's what happens in lovemaking. It's why the teacher student is lovemaking. Now, there's other moments when the student may have some original piece of information, original insight that they share with the teacher. And in that moment, the student actually becomes the teacher, which is beautiful. But not because they just made something up. It's one of the conversations Barbara and I always had, right? Barbara would say to everyone, "Oh, that's your Dharma, that's beautiful," but she didn't really mean it. It was a way of just facilitating people, right? And Barbara and I really got to this deep understanding. No, you can't just say something. You have to actually spend your whole life force, right? You have to then, right, fully receive, fully honor, right? Appropriately cite, by the way, right? The places where you received pieces, a sentence here and a sentence here and a sentence here, right? And then from that full receiving, and the text is, anyone who says something in the name of the person who said it brings redemption to the world. It's not that it's all flowing through us. Well, it is all flowing through us. And there's unique places, right, where we actually receive this kind of very deep and very broad and very real and very beautiful, right, original kind of penetration. So I've got to receive that. Then once I've received that, then I might have something new to say, right? Or I might have the same thing to say, but I'll say it in a unique quality of intimacy. And there'll be a unique way that I have to say. So I might have something new to add to it, or I might say it just through my being in a way that's so special and so beautiful and so original. So I'll just give you an example. Yesterday, I was doing a Holy of Holies with Ted, and he shared with me a podcast that he did in which he was literally saying the Dharma. And I think he picked out like 15 minutes of the podcast. And, so we talked about a bunch of dimensions of this, but I actually heard him say the Dharma, and he wasn't adding to it, but it was also completely original and fresh. And I was super proud of him. And it was original and fresh because it was going through Tedness, right? And I could feel a whole expansion of the Dharma that could happen through Tedness that couldn't happen through anyone else. Oh, because he had actually literally put his egoic self aside. But actually by putting his egoic self aside, he then emerged in his full uniqueness of presence. Okay, it's a very subtle thing, right? It's a very subtle thing. It all happens here in this place. So the teacher-student place is this place in which we're in this field of Eros value together. Okay, does everyone get this? It's beautiful, right? We're in this field of Eros value together. We're all equal in the field. We all have a unique expression of the field, right? There's full egalitarianism in terms of everybody's fundamental, right, value, right? Fundamental, right? That's all real. And then we all have different roles to play in the field. And in this incarnation, right, there are teachers and students, and we, in a different incarnation, that might change. But in this incarnation, there's a teacher-student relationship. And if I take someone as a teacher, right, I got to go all the way with that, not to give them authority over me in places where it's inappropriate, not to give them any authority over me in terms of the decisions I make in my life. And yet, we're impacted. We should be impacted. We're not just autonomy. We're also communion, and we're intimate communion. And when we're in the field of value together and looking at a shared horizon together, we listen to each other. And so a teacher should have impact on a student, and a student should have ultimate autonomy and ultimate power, right? And the teacher should always bow to that power and always bow to that autonomy and always bow to the independent integrity, right, of their decision-making. That should always be true. Teachers should never arrogate any power over decision-making of a student. And ultimately, the student also always has to choose, right? Right. And a teacher should be in radical devotion to the student, and right, the teacher and student should be in radical devotion to each other, and they should be in devotion together to the field of she, to the field of value. And there's transmission. Transmission is real, and there's penetration, and then there's mutual penetration, and we love each other open, right? And it's this very, 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 very deep and subtle, right? Deep and subtle play, right? And there's an enormous possibility opens. Now, the depth of teacher-student relationship that I'm describing is not for everybody, because I want to make that really clear. What I just described was not 101 course. I just described the advanced course. Does everyone get that last sentence I just said? What I described is not what I would suggest. I am not suggesting this, right? For like, this should become the model every place. No, I just suggested the advanced course. Does everyone get what I mean by that? That was the advanced course, right? That's what's possible, okay? That's what's possible. So I'm not suggesting this is what should happen every place, everywhere. I'm not suggesting that at all, right? In general, for most people, most of the time, very clear delineations work. We should circumscribe teachers. We should empower students, right? We should probably not have dual relationships and not have blurred roles, right, et cetera. That's all generally true, right? For most people, most of the time. And then we get to a place where that's not enough. That's just not true. And we move from the conventional, what's called in Kohlberg, the conventional, to the post-conventional. And then new possibilities open up. Okay? So this is not for everyone. I'm not suggesting this for everyone, right? This is for a particular developmental structure of consciousness, right? People who want to actually take their unique risk in Eros and love and actually become part of a unique self-symphony and actually speak into the meta-crisis, live into the meta-crisis. Not it's a hobby I do. Not I'm trying to kind of establish myself and kind of paper over my emptiness and my frustration and my anxiety and my rage and my anger at all the times of my life by kind of, propping myself up in some egoic way in the world. If that's what you're doing, this is the wrong place. And everyone's doing that a little bit, right? We're all holy and broken hallelujahs. That's okay. But there's got to be something more powerful and something deeper, right? That's at play, right? So, wow.